Today, Japan is one of the world's most open, modern, and admired nations. Its cities glow with cutting-edge technology, its traditions fascinate millions, and its people are known for harmony, order, and discipline. But what if I told you? This open, global Japan is only a recent chapter? For most of its history, Japan closed its borders. No foreigners allowed in, no Japanese allowed out, and yet this isolated island quietly built a civilization like no other. From emperors and samurai to war and rebirth, Japan followed its own path, and changed the world in the process. This is the entire history of Japan. Let's begin at the beginning. Section 1 From Isolation to Innovation. How did Japan change so much? Why is Japan so modern, so peaceful, so admired yet so different? And how did it get this way when for centuries, it shut the entire world out? No other major country closed its doors for over 200 years by choice. No trade, no outside culture, no immigration, nothing in, nothing out. While Europe was building empires and sailing across oceans, Japan said no, thank you. And then, quietly, it built something entirely its own. This wasn't weakness, it was strategy. The Tokugawa Shogun, which came to power in the early 1600s, chose to seal the country off to keep peace, order, and control. They called it Shogun locked country, and it worked. Japan had no wars with other nations, no colonial exploitation, no outside rule. But it wasn't just peace, it was transformation, art, poetry, cuisine, fashion, education. Everything bloomed under isolation. So let me ask you, would your country survive if it disconnected from the world for 200 years? Japan didn't just survive, it became something irreplaceable. In the next section, we go back to the very beginning, when Japan was first shaped by nature, myth, and migration. Section 2 Myth, Emperors, and the birth of the nation. Long before Japan became a nation, it was a land of forests, mountains, and myths. There were no cities, no borders, no name called Japan. The first people came over 40,000 years ago. They crossed from mainland Asia, bringing stone tools, fire, and the skills to survive. They lived in harmony with nature, and left behind one of the world's oldest pottery traditions. You can still see these ancient designs in museums across Japan. But Japan didn't begin with a king or a war. It began with a myth. According to legend, the sun goddess Kamikaze sent her descendants to rule the land. From that divine bloodline came Japan's emperors, said to be chosen by the gods themselves. And unlike many ancient monarchies, Japan's imperial line never broke. From the very first emperor to today, the crown has always passed within the same family. By the 3rd century AD, Japan had begun to organize under a single powerful clan, the Yamato. From their base in the Nara region, they began to unite other tribes through diplomacy, marriage, and war. With support from Korea and cultural ideas from China, they created Japan's first central government, and with it came an identity, a name, a purpose. This was the beginning of Japan as a nation, not just a place but a people. Section 3 When emperors lost power and the samurai took over. Power doesn't always vanish with a war. Sometimes, it just fades. Quietly, slowly, until it's gone. That's what happened to Japan's emperors. For centuries, they were seen as divine rulers. But by the 800s, something changed. The imperial court had grown distant, elegant, poetic, and ceremonial, but far from the realities of daily life. While nobles wrote poems and hosted banquets in Kyoto, real power was shifting to the countryside. There, local landowners and warriors called samurai began to take control. They collected taxes, built private armies, protected their territories not for the emperor, but for themselves. The emperor still sat on the throne, but more and more, his words meant less. By the 1100s, two powerful clans, the Taira and the Minamoto, were locked in a brutal struggle for control. It ended with the Genpei War, a 5-year civil war that shattered the illusion of imperial rule. exist. But power would belong to the sword. Section 4 Kamikaze. When Japan defeated the Mongol Empire. How do you defeat the largest empire the world has ever seen? Without even leaving the shores? In the 1200s, the Mongol Empire had conquered most of Asia. From China to Persia, nothing could stop them. And in 1266, they set their sights on Japan. Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, sent a message. Surrender or be destroyed. Japan gave no reply, and so, the Mongols prepared to invade. In 1274, a massive fleet landed on Kyushu. They brought archers, catapults, and explosive weapons unknown to Japan. The samurai fought bravely but were badly outnumbered. Then the skies shifted. A violent typhoon slammed into the Mongol fleet. Ships sank, soldiers drowned. The invasion failed. Kublai Khan tried again in 1281 with an even larger force. But once more, the storm struck, even stronger than the first. Japan called it Kamikaze, divine wind. A miracle, they believed. The gods had saved their island. But victory came at a cost. The Shogunate had spent everything defending the country. And the samurai who had no spoils of war were left unpaid. Honor turned to anger. Loyalty turned to doubt. The Mongols had failed. But inside Japan, cracks had begun to show. Sometimes, the greatest threat isn't from the outside, but from what happens after you win. Section 5 Guns, Gold, and God. When the West reached Japan, it began with a storm. In 1543, a Portuguese ship was blown off course and landed on a small Japanese island. 3 Europeans stepped ashore. They were the first Westerners to ever set foot in Japan, and they didn't come empty-handed. They brought something Japan had never seen before: firearms. At the time, Japan was deep in civil war. Dozens of local warlords called daimyo fought for land, power, and survival. Traditional samurai weapons were swords and bows. But when they saw the musket, everything changed. Within just a few years, Japanese blacksmiths were producing guns by the thousands. By 1556, over 300,000 firearms were in use. Warfare would never be the same again. But the Portuguese didn't just bring weapons. They brought religion. Jesuit missionaries spread Christianity, offering salvation and trade advantages. Many warlords saw it as useful. Christian converts got access to European goods. Some even received military support. But not everyone was convinced. Some feared foreign influence. Others saw Christianity as a threat to Japanese identity. One powerful warlord, Oda Nobunaga, used the guns, but not the gospel. He embraced the new weapons to dominate his rivals, starting a bloody campaign to unify the nation. And so, in the middle of chaos, Japan stood at a crossroads. Between East and West, between tradition and transformation, the world had arrived, and Japan would never be the same. Section 6 Peace. We control the Edo era's strange genius. Will your country give up freedom if it guaranteed 250 years of peace? That's what Japan did, after centuries of civil war. One man finally brought the chaos to an end. Tokugawa. He defeated his rivals in 1600 at the Battle of Sekigahara. 3 years later, he was granted the title of Shogun. His rule began the Edo period, a time of peace, order, and control. But this peace wasn't solved. It was strict. The samurai were turned into bureaucrats. Movement was tightly restricted. Lords had to leave their families in Edo as hostages. The country was divided into tightly managed domains. Religion was controlled. Foreigners were expelled. And in 1639, Japan fully closed its borders. No one in, no one out. This system was called Sakoku, locked country. And somehow it worked. Japan had no wars for over 250 years. No invasions. No foreign colonization. Art and culture flourished. Kabuki theater, ukiyo-e prints, haiku poetry, the tea ceremony, even sushi became refined during this time. So here's the question: can peace exist without freedom? Or does true stability require sacrifice? The Edo system created one of the most peaceful eras in history. few modern societies would accept. Next, we'll see what happens when that peace is shattered from the outside. Section 7. The black ships arrive and Japan awakens. For over 2 centuries, Japan was a close, stable, peaceful nation. But peace can protect you from everything. In 1853, black smoke appeared on the horizon. Massive American warships entered Tokyo Bay, led by Commodore Matthew Perry. They came with cannons, steam engines, and a letter from the U.S. President. Japan had to open its ports. There was no negotiation, only pressure. The Tokugawa Shogun had no answer. Its army was outdated, its ships were wooden, its worldview had not changed in 200 years. They agreed, reluctantly, and under threat. Treaties were signed, trade was forced. Other Western powers quickly followed Britain, France, Russia, the Netherlands. Suddenly, Japan was no longer isolated. This moment was a shock. For the samurai, it was humiliation. For the people, confusion. For the country, an identity crisis. Some wanted to resist the West. Others wanted to copy it. The old system was cracking. And in 1868, it collapsed entirely. Young reformers from the provinces of Satsuma and Choshu, backed by dissatisfied samurai, marched into Edo. They restored power to the emperor. The Tokugawa Shogunate was finished. Japan was reborn under the Meiji Restoration. And from that moment on, Japan would never look inward again. Section 8. Becoming modern. Japan's race to catch up. In 1868, Japan made a decision that would change everything. To modernize or be left behind. The emperor, once a symbol, became the center of a new national vision. And under the banner of the Meiji Restoration, Japan set out to rebuild itself from the ground up. Samurai lost their swords, castles lost their power, and the feudal class system, gone. Trains and telegraphs replaced horses and messengers. Uniforms replaced the moment. New schools were opened. New ideas were welcomed. The government hired hundreds of foreign experts, engineers, architects, military officers, and teachers. Japan studied the West with obsession, and then started to build its own version. A modern army, a national railway, a centralized banking system, a constitution. Everything changed fast. In just a few decades, Japan went from an isolated kingdom to a functioning modern state. But not everyone celebrated. Many struggled with the loss of tradition. Others feared that Japan was becoming something it wasn't. Was this still Japan, or just a copy of the West? The answer, in a way, was both. Japan didn't just imitate, it adapted. It took what it needed, and reshaped it with Japanese spirit, discipline, and precision. This wasn't the end of Japan's identity. It was the beginning of something entirely new. Section 9. Empire rising when Japan shocked the world. In the early 1900s, Japan did something no Asian nation had ever done. It beat the West. After modernizing its army, navy, and economy, Japan turned its eyes upward. First came victory over China in 1895, then shockingly over Russia in 1905. The Russo-Japanese War split the world. An Asian power had defeated a European empire. For Japan, it was a moment of pride. For Europe, a wake-up call. Suddenly, Japan wasn't just catching up, it was leading. In 1910, Japan annexed Korea. It joined World War I on the side of the Allies. And by the 1920s, it held islands across the Pacific. Japan was no longer just a student of the West. It was an imperial power of its own. But power is a dangerous drug. National pride turned into nationalism. Expansion turned into aggression. And influence turned into control. Some celebrated Japan's rise. Others questioned its path. Was Japan following Western footsteps? Or repeating their mistakes? The answer wasn't clear, but the signs were there. Underneath the victories, tensions were building. The economy was strained. Politics were unstable. And the military was growing louder. Japan had won respect, but it was about to face a test much harder than any war. The test of what kind of empire it really wanted to be. Section 10. From Ashes to Peace. How Japan rose Instead of colonies, it built cameras, radios, computers. Instead of domination, it chose mastery. By the 1960s, Japan had become the world's second largest economy. By the 1980s, it was leading in technology, innovation, and design. But perhaps its greatest strength was not what it built, but what it refused to become. It didn't seek revenge. It didn't chase empire again. It focused forward in precision, on harmony, on people. Japan didn't rise by becoming louder. It rose by becoming better. In the end, Japan's story isn't just about war, swords, or empires. It's about the quiet power of culture, patience, and discipline. And in a world that often chooses noise over wisdom, Japan reminds us that silence, too, can lead. This is just one example of Japan's unique way of thinking. Do people in your country do the same, or is it completely different? Drop your thoughts below. I read every comment. And if you like this, subscribe for a new video every day. See you tomorrow at the same time.